I'm trying to turn sustainable design through vintage on its head, right? Like a lot of design has, vintage accents put in here and there, but I'm trying to do the opposite. Like my filler pieces are the new pieces, and I can practically design a whole room using vintage antiques. And maybe sometimes there's a couple things that need to be new, but everything else can kind of be sourced without creating new production, and that's really exciting to me that I can get around that. I do like the fact that when I source vintage and secondhand, I am contributing minimally to my carbon footprint of reducing fossil fuel emissions and waste of materials and hopefully sometimes transport costs too.
Today's episode was a treat for me, as I'm sure it will be for you, especially if you have a love for or even just a curiosity about vintage items or antiques. I sat down with Ksenya Malina, founder of Time and Place Interiors in New York City. Ksenya and I met a few years back at the height of COVID through an online networking platform. And we were both in really similar places as far as our businesses were concerned, and we've stayed in touch ever since. Ksenya has translated her passion for artistry, sustainability, and preservation into a unique design studio. Her keen eye for good design has allowed her to create a specialized experience for her clients through her Style Revealed package. She shares that her inspiration for this service came from a desire to help eliminate decision fatigue for her clients, which I can certainly appreciate. Ksenya believes that our homes provide the backdrop to living our best lives, and she shows her clients how they can enjoy authentic, everyday beauty using vintage and modern design. Ksenya holds a bachelor's in art history from NYU College of the Arts and Sciences and an MBA from NYU Stern School of Business. She has worked for Christie's Auction House, a global consulting firm, and a New York City luxury interior design studio. Ksenya is a certified WELL AP through the International Well Building Institute, demonstrating a commitment to advancing wellness and design, all of which is speaking my love language. Ksenya has certainly carved out a beautiful niche for herself. I hope you enjoy today's episode with Ksenya Malina. Well, everything I said when I reached out, I completely mean.
Thank you.
I am such a fan of what you have been doing in your own space. Like, I love your logo, the cute Art Deco
Oh,
piece, and your blog is so clean and tasteful. It's just so simple, but yet so engaging. I love all the white background you have, and it's very well
thank
done.
you, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
you're
really sweet.
welcome. And I also wanted to chat because we both share a love of antiques,
Yeah.
as you know.
Yes.
Well, I'm an amateur, I will say, but you have a very professional presence with antiques.
Wow.
So when I go
Are we on
antique,
air?
we are. When I antique, I just love the find and I love finding all the things, but I'm not educated to where I know what I'm looking at or who I'm looking at or so I'm sure you are probably a little bit more educated from that perspective, but I
Oh,
do love going.
I mean, that's more of it than necessarily the education. And, I don't have like some sort of specialist training. I used to work for Christie's Auction House where I was sort of surrounded by antiques, but it wasn't like an academic training. But I think that training is something that comes not from necessarily studying, but from experience of going to the shops and seeing patterns repeat of the kinds of things that you see. And also, honestly, just scrolling, like scrolling on
Mm.
Cherish, scrolling on First Dibs, scrolling even on Craigslist and learning names that way. And also reading design journals, where I would say like good with a capital G designers integrate some sort of vintage into their portfolio. And so if you read captions on shelter magazines like Elle Decor, Architectural Digest, House Beautiful, you'll see mention. And so that in itself is kind of a training, but it's really about the fun. And you don't necessarily need to know exactly what you're looking for. And I by no means do every time either. It's and then sometimes I see things and I'm like seeing them again and again, and then it's education for me.
Yeah, and it's very apparent just in your blog. You know, you might be sharing photos of your own work, but you also very eloquently showcase other designers or photographers in that space too.
Mhm.
And It's just so cohesive the way you present it, and you can tell that you have a true love for integrating antiques into design. It shows very well.
I do. Thank you.
So
Thanks for saying that.
yeah, absolutely. So what I'm curious like what you're inspired by. So you know, as I said, I like to go antique shopping. In fact, I'll go away for weekends
Yeah,
and
awesome.
we were talking about Frederick, Maryland, and I was like, I'm going antiquing, but that's like a nice weekend getaway for me is a
Yes.
cute boutique hotel and some
Ah,
antiquing.
nice.
And so I'm curious, I know you just recently traveled to Italy. So where does your inspiration come for your designs and how you integrate antiques and vintage into them?
Yeah, I think it's kind of from a combination of my background studying art. So it's not that I'm integrating fine art from world history painters, but there's something that you learn about the past by studying art from the past. You also learn you learn history through art, and you end up learning what interiors were like. So I'd say the art background and also my hobby of going antiquing and seeing how things can be put together nicely and looking at other designers' work. I kind of came to this with at first a love for vintage clothing, which I think a lot of people who are into vintage furniture sort of started out with because it's a little bit more accessible. And a desire for myself in the past and still now to source sustainably and also cost effectively. And antiques allow for that. They get kind of a rep of like the cheap kind of, thrift shopping, which is not necessarily the case. Like it really ranges from that end to really high-end
Mhm.
vintage designer pieces, but it is a way to get a lot more bang for your buck. The cost of antiques can go a lot, even as vintage is becoming more popular and prices are rising, and it is honestly becoming harder and harder to find like the deal of a lifetime. But I still
Mhm.
find that the value for them is greater than what you generally pay for really good quality contemporary pieces. So with contemporary new manufacturers, you end up paying for the cost of new materials and for the labor. And vintage, while it has a cachet of cool and hip and interest, and you obviously you get oftentimes the quality there, but you sort of eliminate those costs of what comes with new productions. And so you end up having to pay a lot more for contemporary design that's truly good, with truly good quality and truly good craftsmanship and a real style to it than you would with comparable vintage things. So there is a cost benefit to that as well. We can talk about newly produced furnishings and decor, but there's so much of what's already out there that's already readily made, and vintage truly is the most sustainable way to furnish your home. Even secondhand pieces, like there's so much great stuff out there, it almost eliminates the need to buy new. The circularity is just so obvious with it. So I
Mhm.
do like the fact that when I source vintage and secondhand, I am contributing minimally to my carbon footprint of reducing fossil fuel emissions and waste of materials and hopefully sometimes transport costs too, although, sometimes you do need to ship antiques. So there's
Mhm.
there's that element too. It makes me feel good. And I kind of approach it as I was thinking recently, like I'm trying to turn sustainable design through vintage on its head, right? Like a lot of design has, vintage accents put in here and there, but I'm trying to do the opposite. Like my filler pieces are the new pieces, and I can practically design a whole room using vintage antiques. And maybe sometimes there's a couple things that need to be new. Like say you really need like a real practical serving media cabinet for under your television because of technology changes. Like those things weren't made at the time. But otherwise, from your rugs to accessories to, maybe not your sofa, but everything else can kind of be sourced without creating new production. And that's really exciting to me that I can get around that.
Yeah, it's interesting because in feng shui, I don't want to say it's sourcing vintage or antique is looked down upon. It's just something in our practice we try to be more mindful of from the perspective that objects themselves hold energy,
Hmm.
right? Anything, whether it's good or bad, energy. So, what's known as predecessor chi can be found in objects. And I personally still like to use antique and vintage pieces for the same reasons you do, but I just try to be mindful about where it's coming from the perspective of, let's say, for example, you inherited your grandmother's credenza, for
Hmm.
example, and your relationship with your grandmother was loving and kind and caring, and she inspired you and she loved you, and you have great memories. And so the energy of that credenza is very positive,
Yeah.
right? So bringing that into your home is positive. So that's a good piece. But I've been to clients' homes where I can pick up on the energy of an object rather quickly. And I see this a lot with furniture pieces, but we'll just say a chair, for example, I might pick up on the energy of that. And I'll just ask the client, like, tell me about this chair. And, they say, oh, it was my grandfather's and it was his favorite chair. And, nobody knew what to do with it. So I
Yeah.
said I'd
By
take it.
default.
But if your memory of your grandfather wasn't great, I mean, maybe he was, abusive or an alcoholic or
Hmm.
just, wasn't very kind, then the energy of that chair isn't necessarily great, right?
Right.
So that's what I was describing as predecessor chi, just the
Yes.
energy that an object can hold. So just asking a client about a piece in my practice is important. And I can pick up on that rather quickly. And so, if there is a negative energy, you can clear it. You can clear the energy through a few means, like you mentioned, clothing or even jewelry. So, vintage items that can be laid out into the sun. The sun itself is a very yang energy. So, you can clear things that way
Mm.
very simply. And then also smoke, incense or any smudging of some sort is also appropriate in that situation. I try to just bring awareness to people when they are using antiques, what they represent. And so if it isn't inherited and you did purchase it secondhand, origins unknown, then I always just typically recommend a clearing. And even in my shop that I've launched, I have a small curation of things that I've sourced. And when I bring them in, I have them cleared and then I bless them with some positive energy too before shipping them out.
That's a really interesting perspective and new for me and educational to hear. And I think to your point about when you purchase something or you acquire something that doesn't have a family history, or maybe it does. The other way you can think about it is you're, as somebody said, you're writing a new chapter in that object's life. So you could potentially
Exactly.
create your own story around it. And hopefully it doesn't come with bad memories, but if it's new to you, if the process of acquiring it was a pleasant one, think of it as you're giving it a new lease on life.
100%. Yeah. I mean, after a clearing, that's kind of like the next step. What is the intention you're setting for this piece? It's a piece you love and, let it know that. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but it's
No,
so
but it's true.
true.
It's
Energy,
true.
it is all
Intentional
encompassing.
living is how we live with the items in our lives. There is a real component of emotional wellness to it, right? Because if
Mhm.
if you don't have good energy in your space, it probably, which you know more of, it leads to stress, right? Like it triggers our cortisol levels, and if you're uncomfortable with how your room is, then chances are there's like a weight on you. So
Mhm.
all that goes hand in hand.
Yeah. It does, and it's happening at such a unconscious level,
Hmm.
right? You're not aware of it until someone like myself in a consultation would point that out to you.
Yes.
Every time you walk through that space or look at that chair, for example, it's bringing up those emotions in you, and you don't even really know why. So,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
it's a great tool, and I find that once clients have a little bit of awareness around it, what they wanna do next is really clear, whether they wanna let it go or, again, clear it and give it new life is easier for them to detach from it and then move forward how they
That's
choose,
super
so
smart because we so many consultations that I do as well, that people just have things for reasons that are varied, that are not intentional, right? But that's just kind of a fact of life, right? Like you inherited this,
Mhm,
or when you and your partner moved in together, like he brought this, she brought that. You meant to replace this for something nicer, but you never got around to it. And so we have these layers that it can be nice to work around them, right? To make a design of a space more forgiving. But on the other hand, there's value in sort of taking an assessment of is what you have here really working for you?
Mhm.
And if there is potential to replace it with something, even if you're replacing it with something that's not new, like newly created, is that something worth thinking about? And I think so.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, with the industry that we're in and what we do, I think that's one of the things we can provide to clients is just this different perspective on things
Hmm.
that they can't necessarily see from themselves, whether it's a design project or an emotional attachment to
Hmm.
something, right? So I know you just went to Italy. I'm curious when you travel, do you visit markets and shop vintage or anything you can share what it's like internationally?
Yeah,
I'm intrigued, so I'm hoping you
oh,
do.
no, yeah, I did. Lucky me, I got to go to Italy twice this year after not traveling for like 3 years. My husband and I were like on a roll with it, so super fortunate to have done that. The first trip was to a region that's quite remote from especially international tourism, a little bit in tourism who are coming from other parts of Italy called Le Marche, which is sort of southeast of Tuscany. And then the second time was to Venice, which is certainly much more
Mm,
touristy, but we ended up finding ways to make it a little bit more of a local experience. I have to say that when I'm traveling internationally, like my focus is not to shop.
mm.
But I but when there is an antique shop, when there is a design store, I certainly will come in. So I don't necessarily plan my foreign trips around shopping, although going to Paris flea markets is like a dream that
Right?
I need to
I
make
know.
happen sometime soon. But like when you're traveling internationally, like especially in a country like Italy that does beauty so well, there's just beauty and inspiration in everything, right? Like the hotels, if you're staying at it, a halfway decent place will most likely have something antique there. I wrote a blog post about both of those trips, and both of the lodgings that we had for each trip had so much inspiration of that. So it's more like it comes from the everyday experience rather than necessarily shopping. But when I
Mhm.
travel locally, sometimes going to antique stores is the focus. Of the trip,
Mhm.
especially if it's a short trip or a day trip, like my ideal day getaway outside of New York City is to, go upstate or somewhere in the tri-state area, do a nice nature walk, do a good lunch with a good beer and then do some antique shopping. But I never
Yeah.
have enough time to hit up all the spots that I want to do. And inevitably I always spend hours going through it. So yeah, no one would argue, right, that travel is a
Right.
great inspiration.
For sure. Does your husband share the same joy of antiquing?
He's come to it and he knows he's like really trained his eye and oftentimes he'll point out to me things that he knows that I would like and
Mhm.
chances are he's spot on, which is kind of cute that or this has like become a sort of a hobby for that's become a mutual one.
Yeah, same.
I took on the beer hobby with him and he took on the antiquing hobby with me.
There you go. Yeah, you sound like my husband and myself as well. He he likes antiquing, but not for the same types. He's more of a oddities kind of guy. He likes
Ah,
to
okay.
find really unique and off the wall things. He loves a lot of odd taxidermy items, things like
Mm,
that. So, but it's fun because, there's a plethora of
sure.
options out there for any and all. So
Something for
it's
everybody.
interesting. Yeah. So when we shop for each other, we sometimes buy each other antiques. I forget where he was, but he brought me home like these two vintage little frames. And I was like, this is like the best gift
That's
ever.
so
This like
sweet.
beats like jewelry. Like when you just
That's so
get me
sweet.
so well that you brought me home some
That's
framed
lovely.
art. Like then for him, being an oddities lover, I'm always looking for like a jackalope or something, when I'm out and about shopping. So it's funny. But
That's
and then when
awesome.
you mentioned the beer, him too. It's funny. We like to do bike rides around the city and he always plans our bike rides that ends in a stop for a beer.
Well,
So
you're in a good place for it in your
yeah,
city.
we are. I mean, our bike trail runs along the river and there's all kinds of breweries,
Yeah,
along the way. So every bike trip ends in a beer celebration.
that
So that's
sounds
funny.
that sounds perfect.
So I'm curious about your creative process. How do you kind of get in the zone with a client and start curating items and, developing your mood board? Like what kind of gets you going in a project?
I think because I don't come from a trained interior design background of floor plans and the technical side so much. And what really
Same.
motivates me is a particular piece or a vision. And I tend to get really excited when I happen to find just the perfect item. And sometimes it comes to me just by searching without having an intention to find something specific, but something will speak to me. And then I tend to build a room around it. I get especially excited when I can mix and match things that go together but are not exactly the same. Like, for example, like a lamp pair, like say I find like two chinoiserie ceramic lamps, but they're not an exact match, but they're complements to each other. Or I am able to get one kind of thing in one place and then source its pair from another, like maybe two side tables that would pair well but aren't necessarily sold by the same vendor. That kind of thing really excites me. It's like a treasure hunt for me. So I start working around one or two things and then the room builds and I find connections between things and I try to create a little bit of juxtaposition so that it's not all one style, and that eclectic connection really excites me. Maybe there's
Mhm.
a something nice to be said about mismatching wood, but say maybe there's a similar wood tone between two very different kinds of things. Like maybe something is mid-century, but something maybe is like a more traditional American antique. And their contrast is evident, but there's a flow between them, and that really gets me going. Sourcing is the most fun for me, and so I have this package called Style Revealed, and it's a process of creating an accessibly priced design package for folks who want interesting pieces that feel like they have personality to them and a space that can be completed with pretty good efficiency of time. And so what that is a process where I get to know a client in terms of what they want their space to feel like, how they use their space. And we get down into real specifics of how they want to use it, who participates in it. Do they want to feel more formal? Do they want to feel more relaxed? Then we go through a process of aesthetics of what colors or patterns they gravitate towards, what shapes or forms they like. And then we move into a more specific scope of the design project where we end up determining exactly what items, if any, in the room stay, what is going to be replaced. And so we get to a very specific idea of what pieces are going to go into a room. However, I source on my own. And so that's what makes it accessibly priced. And that's what allows me to move quicker. So we don't go through proposal meetings. And so those kinds of projects where I get more leniency and creativity are the ones where I end up doing my best work because I am sourcing with my clients' aesthetic and style and preferences and desire for use in mind, but I am casting such a wide net in terms of where I can go because I can source so much more effectively and efficiently that more of the focus of the design project becomes on that sourcing. So whether it's I'm at a vintage market, if I am at a shop, if I happen to see something online, I can scope it up if I feel like it's the right piece for the project. And then I get in that zone, and that's where I'm most creative. And sometimes clients get to a point where they feel like inevitably in every project, like they've spent X amount of money, right? And they're kind of getting burned out with decision making and they feel like they don't really need that extra accessory. With Style Revealed, it gives me the ability to add that accessory if I feel like that space would really need it. And then clients are always really pleased that they ended up having it. And so there's a styling component to it that's really exciting for me too, because I really like the details. I like the vessels. I like the tabletop decor. I like the side lamps. I like the footstools. I like those kinds of things. And those are great to source through vintage and artisan made. So those are most exciting for me. And just to clarify, there is always a set budget. So there's one number, and it's my responsibility
Mhm.
as the designer to fit all of those pieces into that budget. So I work hard to get good return on
Yeah.
my client's investment into their room, but the design ends up being to their style, to their look, but with the kinds of pieces that they wouldn't necessarily have found, or they may have been a little bit resistant to if we did a full service project where they get to line item approve everything. But in the end, it really works
Mhm.
out well.
Yeah, that's a really great service and approach because that's the challenge for us
Mhm.
designers is when we're presenting the full scope of the project. I don't line item anything anymore because of that very reason, because
Mhm.
even if it is just a tray that's going to sit on your table, it's going to tie together
Yes,
five other pieces in your space. And
exactly.
I don't want you to do a strike through on that line item.
Yeah. Those kinds of pieces make or break a space, and people tend to have a hard time thinking about it that way, which is not a criticism of them. It's just right. It just takes a certain type of thinking that most people just don't do, and that's why they have a decorator. But those kinds of
Exactly.
projects really let me shine and do my best work. So it's the best way for people to get the most out of me when they hire me. And I do really like the concept of that because not to say that it's like dirt cheap. I mean, but it is so much more accessibly priced than full service that it sort of
Mhm.
democratizes good design for people who may not have thought that they could attain that. And so what we were talking about before, like living with intention. So it brings intentional pieces into people's lives. And they're oftentimes not folks who would have hired a designer, but suddenly they're living with, say, an Art Deco sideboard and a mid-century lamp on top of it, and maybe a contemporary table, and maybe like even mismatched chairs around it, and everything is tied together with a commonality. But they get these eclectic pieces, and at the end they get a sheet that it describes of them, and then they're really proud of what they own, and that intentionality is brought back rather than just kind of whatever they happen to have in their space before. So that it opens up opportunities for people to live with good design, not just creative design, but interesting pieces that have authentic character.
Yeah. I do that similarly with elemental interiors. And we do that through the use of the five elements. And we're intentionally ensuring that we have a balance of all of those elements in
Mm,
space. All of the elements that we're talking about, they on their own, they have their own attributes and qualities. They might have a color association or a shape association or a pattern, even, and even just some metaphorical things behind it. But the difference between the five elements in feng shui and other elemental systems is that the five elements work in a cycle, and that cycle is what creates the balance. And I love to share that designers and decorators, they do this naturally,
whether they
and
know it or
almost
not, probably.
intuitively, and they don't even know they're doing it. So that's what I bring to the table myself, is that I'm doing it intentionally. I'm aware of what elements we're pulling into a space, and we're making sure it's balanced. And when we do that, again, going back to just energy, we're making sure the energy of the space feels good
That's
and it
great.
looks good too.
That's great.
So
That's great because that's important. Yeah.
yeah, and then you mentioned sourcing. I too love sourcing. That's my favorite part. I'm sure that's the favorite part of a lot of
Yes.
designers and decorators
Yes.
out there. But that's why I started the shop too, because I love going to markets. I love whether they're vintage or the home markets that we have access to. I when I went to my first market, it was in Atlanta, and I was like a deer in headlights, but I was so excited to be there. I was like, "This is like the most amazing shopping day ever," right? But I love sourcing, so that's why, again, I started the shop because I wanted to curate something that I could sell with my name on it because
That's really
I don't
dreamy.
know, I just love it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
isn't that
that's really
dreamy?
dreamy. My goal is to get to a point where I can have like a mini warehouse of things that I've procured through that kind of creative shopping and then pull from that to do style revealed packages because there's so many times when I'm shopping and I'm thinking, if somebody were to do an entryway, this console would be so fabulous. And wouldn't this
Mhm.
mirror look like so great? And
Yep.
that one vessel that I saw at the last shop, like that would have just really tied everything together, right? But we don't always have the exact project that we need for something, which is the reality until, it comes up later and then it's too late, right? So that would be a real goal of mine and kudos to you for doing your plans for the shop so that you could do a little bit of that.
Yeah, and I started very small, like anything that I am selling that's vintage on the site are small easily packaged items, but you're so right. There are times where it's a console, it's a mirror, it's a large piece of art that
Mhm.
I just fall in love with the second I see it, and I
Mhm.
don't even have the means to get it out of the vintage shop, you
That's
know?
right.
And I'm
That's
like, I
right.
can't even
That's
get
right.
it
How are you gonna
out.
transport it
Where am I
home?
gonna put
Where are
it?
you gonna put
Yeah,
it?
right, and I can't sell that online, like, I'm not getting into that kind of shipping, but so,
Oh, yeah.
long term, the goal is to eventually have, like, a shop or something where I can curate these things and sell them brick and mortar, but that's a little bit ways away, so we're starting small, right? You gotta start
Yes.
somewhere, I guess.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Starting is the hardest part, so good on you.
So, before we wrap up, I'm curious what your favorite room or area is in your own home.
Good question. So I just mentioned the entry, and I think our entry and foyer is, even though it's the smallest space. So I'm in a New York City apartment, and it's a pre-war from 1939 with a lot of the original architectural details in place, and the most 1930s, Art Deco feel of the apartment is in that foyer. So we have this heavy metal door that we had scraped, not ourselves, the contractor did it, but it has this really uneven metal patina, looks kind of industrial,
Mhm,
and I really like it. It doesn't have a lot of daylight in that area, but the fact that the door is stripped gets just a little bit of a shine, like in a good matte way. And I updated the door handle. It had this junky 1990s metal that was so thin that it got bent. When I sourced a 1930s vintage door handle, I put an Art Deco shaped backplate around it, and then I have um, a cluster of English Art Deco mirrors in different shapes hung around on one wall, and then underneath that is a Deco Revival console in a black glass, but it's from the 1980s. So it has this like stepped shape that evokes the 1930s, but it's actually a modern piece. And so it's a nice contrast, but yet has the theme of Art Deco to it. So it's just kind of a small space that has a lot of cool elements. And interesting enough, it's from the 1930s, even though it has nothing to do with Art Deco except for the same time period. I have an Afghan tribal rug underneath it on the floor, obviously. So everything is kind of from the same time. The American
mhm.
manufacturing of the door, the English mirrors, the 1980s console, the Afghan rug, but it's not like over your head Art Deco, but there's a good aura in there, I think.
Nice. All right. And when do you feel balanced?
That's a good question. I think when I'm taking care of myself, I feel the best, which is not that unique of an answer, but when I've been exercising, when I've been enjoying the outdoors, I'm lucky enough to live next to a really beautiful New York City park. And I feel the energy is best then because I'm working, but I'm removed from work. And I think that's important to our work as well when we're stepping away from it and taking care of ourselves. And then the work comes more naturally and we're
Mhm.
more ready to take it on. So yeah, there's so many times when I feel like I have so much to do and I can hardly get it done in the day. And, maybe now in winter, now is not the best for that. But when it's nice out and despite what would seem logical of using every moment, I get outside and I take a brisk walk or I take the baby on a stroll, I end up feeling like that was the best use of my time, and the work will be there and the chores will be there, but the park
Right.
and the changing seasons are so fleeting and the daylight isn't forever, and what a nice way to, like, treat yourself and take care of yourself holistically.
Absolutely. Self-care is the best answer to that question, just taking care of
Mhm.
yourself and surrounding yourself by nature. It's the
It
best
really
healer
is.
of all.
It really is. There's a lot of science behind that too.
And last question, what are you most grateful for right now, or what are you inspired for 2023?
Grateful that I have the opportunity to build my business because I have the support that I need to do that. It's not easy being an entrepreneur. It's no guarantee that things will work out. And I feel really fortunate all the time that I have a family that supports that I have access to childcare that allows me to just even take some time to like think and work on my business and not necessarily in my business. That I have a spouse who is understanding that it's a long game and that I have enough stability in my life outside of my work that allows me to plan for the future without always being too nervous about the present moment, even if there's uncertainty in it. I know not everybody has that kind of opportunity to, just try something new and take on a new
Mhm.
challenge and not have a guarantee that it'll be stable for a few years. And that's a real gift that I have. And so it made me feel like I'm fortunate that I have this and I should take mindful and grateful advantage of it.
Great answer. Senya, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation
Same,
immensely.
same.
And, before we wrap up, I just want to give you the opportunity to just let people know where they can find out more about you and if they want to learn more about vintage antiques and all the things you do on the Good Patina blog. Where can people find you?
Absolutely, and it's been my pleasure as well. So my website is timeandplaceinteriors.com. My blog lives on there. I post monthly with ideas for decorating with vintage and just living well. So there's a lifestyle component to that as well that is circle around design, but weaving in different ideas about home and life in there. And you can also follow me on social media at Time and Place Interiors. On my website, if you want to sign up to get my monthly posts, you'll get a free copy of my guide called Five Unexpected Ways to Decorate with Antiques, and that will sign you up for my monthly mailing list. So I'd love for everybody to join.
Yeah, and I vouch for it. I'm on the list and I enjoy it. I
That's
think
really
it's
great to
you
hear.
do a wonderful job with it.
Thank you very
So,
much. I enjoy writing it as much as I hope people enjoy reading it. So thank you. Thank you for
yeah,
having me. It was a really
of
enlightening
course.
conversation and wonderful to hear all the things that you're thinking about and bringing so much intentionality to design and living. And we need more of that.
Yes, thank you. All right. Take care.
Bye bye.
Appreciated this.
Bye bye.
I don't know about you, but I'm certainly ready to go antiquing. And with spring coming, all the markets are starting to stir with new finds and sales. And so I'm getting very, very excited about that. Senya is such a delight. I really hope that you enjoyed her. All of Senya's information is in the show notes, including a link to sign up for the Good Patina blog. And make sure you do that so you can get your free copy of Senya's guide, 5 Unexpected Ways to Decorate with Antiques. You can also find Senya on most social platforms at Time and Place Interiors. Lastly, I mentioned spring is on its way, and I'm cooking up some things that I think I'm only going to offer to my email subscribers. So please make sure you're on my list. There's a link in the show notes for you to sign up, and in exchange for your email, I will send you 5 ways you can uplift your home's energy now. Thank you again for your support of the Living Elemental podcast. Until next time, much love and gratitude.